Who does this vehicle belong to? You don't look like the owner.
It's mine.
I'm gonna need to search it.
Do you have probable cause?
Step back. Don't make this difficult.
I'm Dr. Anthony Shaw, administrator of the DEA.
This is a federal vehicle.
At 3:18 p.m. in a gated neighborhood outside a major U.S. city, a patrol officer believed he'd just found something worth seizing. The SUV was spotless, unmarked, expensive. The driver didn't argue, didn't rush, didn't explain himself. That calm only made the officer more suspicious. From the moment the lights flashed, the questions weren't about speed or traffic violations. They were about ownership, about money, about how someone like him could afford a vehicle like that. The officer pressed for a search, hinted at cash, suggested contraband. What he didn't realize was that the man standing in front of him wasn't hiding anything. He was protecting something. Because this wasn't a luxury SUV, it was a secure federal vehicle. And the person the officer was about to detain wasn't a suspect. He was the administrator of the entire Drug Enforcement Administration. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. Stories like these only matter when people see how power actually collapses. The neighborhood sat in an affluent suburb approximately 12 miles from downtown. Gated entries controlled access. Tree-lined streets wound through properties valued between $2 and $8 million. The kind of area where police presence was typically minimal. Calls were usually about minor disputes or false alarms triggered by expensive security systems. Residents paid for privacy. They expected discretion. They expected that law enforcement would be respectful of the distinction between their neighborhood and others. Marcus Shaw was driving home from a secured federal facility in a 2024 Cadillac Escalade. The vehicle was unmarked, no government plates, no insignia, no indication of official use. That was intentional, deliberate federal protocol. High-level operational commanders required discreet transportation, nothing that announced federal presence, nothing that compromised security, nothing that advertised authority. Shaw was 58 years old, 32 years with the DEA. He had worked his way through every level of the organization with deliberate precision. Field agent in Miami in the 1990s, supervisor of a regional task force, regional director overseeing 5 states, associate deputy administrator at the national level. Now, for the past 2 years, he held the position of administrator, the highest operational authority in the entire Drug Enforcement Administration. He answered to the Deputy Attorney General. He oversaw approximately 9,000 employees across 56 countries. His operational decisions affected federal narcotics enforcement policy worldwide. He had just finished a classified briefing with his executive team about ongoing operations spanning 6 countries and multiple continents. The briefing involved sensitive intelligence about international drug trafficking networks. The information was compartmentalized. The details were restricted to the highest security clearance levels. His personal security detail was minimal but present. 2 federal agents positioned at a distance that allowed him freedom of movement while maintaining protective oversight. They were experienced. They understood the balance between security and operational discretion. At 3:18 p.m., Marcus Shaw was approaching a traffic light on Meridian Street when he noticed red and blue lights activate behind him in his rearview mirror. The lights were unmistakable, sudden, authoritative, a traffic stop. He had done nothing wrong. He wasn't speeding. He had maintained consistent speed in the residential zone. He wasn't weaving between lanes. He wasn't making illegal turns. He wasn't violating any traffic laws. He was simply driving home from work in a vehicle he owned personally, purchased with his accumulated salary over 2 years, registered under his name with complete documentation, insured appropriately through a standard commercial provider. He pulled over smoothly into a residential area near the entrance to the neighborhood. The patrol car pulled in behind him, lights still flashing, creating a scene visible to anyone in the surrounding homes. The patrol car's engine remained running. The officer didn't immediately exit the vehicle. Shaw waited. After approximately 45 seconds, the officer emerged from the vehicle. His hand rested casually on his belt near his duty weapon. He moved toward the driver's side window with the practiced gait of someone conducting dozens of traffic stops each month. This was routine for him, automatic. His Bodycam activated automatically when he stepped out of the patrol car, standard protocol for all traffic interactions. Shaw lowered his window. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, exactly as he had been trained in federal protocol. He understood the dynamics of traffic stops. He understood how authority functioned at the local level. He understood that this was a moment that could escalate or de-escalate, depending on how he responded. The officer was James Kowalski, 43 years old, 11 years on the force. He had been with the police department since 2013. His service record showed no complaints filed. His conduct reviews were satisfactory. He had completed state-mandated training on civil rights and constitutional protections. He was considered an adequate officer by departmental standards. "Good afternoon," Shaw said. His voice was even, respectful, the tone of someone who understood that courtesy could diffuse tension. "License and registration," Kowalski said. "No greeting, no explanation for the stop, no statement of why he had activated his lights, just demands issued with the authority of someone who expected obedience." Shaw reached over slowly and retrieved his registration from the glove compartment. The movement was deliberate and visible. He wasn't reaching for anything else, wasn't concealing his movements. He removed his license from his wallet. He held both documents and handed them through the window without comment. Kowalski looked at the license, then at Shaw, then at the vehicle, examining it through the window. His expression shifted slightly, a tightening around the eyes. His jaw moved. Something about what he was seeing, or who he was seeing, had triggered a response. "This your car?" he asked. His tone carried skepticism, the kind of disbelief that suggested he didn't believe the answer before Shaw provided it. "Yes," Shaw said simply. Kowalski examined the registration. The document confirmed that the vehicle was registered to Marcus Shaw at a residential address in the gated neighborhood. Everything was accurate. Everything was in order. "You own this?" he asked. His voice had changed. It carried doubt now, not the casual skepticism of a routine stop, but something more pointed, something that suggested he didn't believe that the man in front of him could legitimately own such a vehicle. "I do," Shaw said. His voice remained calm, measured, exactly the kind of composed demeanor that, in Shaw's experience, would be interpreted as suspicious by some officers. Composure sometimes triggered more suspicion rather than less. Remaining calm was sometimes read as having something to hide. "Where'd you get the money for this?" Kowalski asked. The question wasn't about the stop anymore. It wasn't about traffic violations. It was about wealth, about how it was obtained, about whether it was legitimate. Shaw didn't immediately answer. He understood what was happening. He had prosecuted cases in his youth before joining the DEA. He understood the assumptions that guided some police interactions. "I'm asking how you purchased this vehicle," Kowalski repeated, as if Shaw hadn't heard the question. "Financing? Cash? Where'd the money come from?" "From a dealership, through normal purchasing, with a finance agreement." Kowalski circled the vehicle, walking slowly around the perimeter while his Bodycam captured the pristine condition of the SUV. No dents, no scratches, no wear. Recent model year. All maintenance current. The kind of vehicle someone with significant financial resources would purchase and maintain meticulously. The vehicle was immaculate. He returned to the driver's side window. "Nice car," he said. "Really nice. How much you spend on this?" $87,000, Shaw said. "Why are you asking?" "Just curious," Kowalski said, but there was nothing casual about the curiosity. "Not many people afford a car like this through normal means. Usually involves some kind of activity that brings significant income, narcotics, illegal enterprises, that sort of thing. Drug trafficking operations, money laundering, that's typically how people end up with vehicles this nice at your age. Shaw understood immediately and completely what was happening. He had seen this before in his career, the assumption that wealth, particularly in the hands of a black man, indicated criminality, the automatic conflation of financial success with illegal activity, the implicit accusation that his prosperity was a red flag rather than the result of decades of professional work. I am a federal employee. My income is public record. My salary supports this purchase. It's not complicated. A federal employee, Kowalski repeated, drawing the words out as if they were suspicious in themselves. Doing exactly what exactly? Federal employee covers a lot. Could be anything. Could be something that explains how you got the cash for this. Shaw hesitated. His position was classified to a degree that went beyond normal confidentiality. His operational details were not appropriate for discussion with a local patrol officer who had initiated a stop without articulating any legal justification. His command responsibilities were sensitive. His daily activities involved classified information. I work for a federal agency, Shaw said. My employment is documented. My background has been vetted at the highest security level. That's all I can appropriately discuss. Federal agency, DEA, FBI, ATF, immigration, which one? I'm not required to answer that question, and I'd like to know the traffic violation that prompted this stop. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. His Bodycam captured his expression tightening. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, he said. For what reason? Shaw asked. You haven't cited a traffic violation. You've asked me questions about my employment and my vehicle ownership, but you haven't stated a legal basis for this stop or a reason to remove me from my vehicle. I'm asking you to exit the vehicle, Kowalski repeated, his tone harder now. That's a lawful order. You can comply, or we can make this complicated. Your choice.
Shaw unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door and stepped out. He kept his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his hands visible on his sides. He understood the dynamics of this situation better than almost anyone in law enforcement. He had trained officers. He had overseen civil rights compliance. He had reviewed cases of unjustified stops. He knew the protocol. Kowalski directed Shaw to stand near the front of the SUV, away from the door where he had limited ability to retreat. Shaw complied. The Bodycam captured the positioning. Shaw standing in open space in his home neighborhood, standing in a location where neighbors could see him, standing with his hands visible while a police officer maintained control of the vehicle and the interaction. You carrying any contraband in this vehicle? Kowalski asked. The word contraband was specific. It suggested drugs. It suggested weapons. It suggested something illegal. No, Shaw said. You transporting any cash, any large amounts? No, Shaw said. Any narcotics, any controlled substances, any pharmaceutical medications not in a pharmacy container? No, Shaw said. Kowalski walked around the vehicle again, examining windows for visibility into the interior, examining the condition of the tires and wheels, examining the exterior trim and panels, performing the systematic visual inspection of someone searching for justification. A federal employee with a vehicle like this, keeping it in pristine condition, driving home from somewhere at mid-afternoon? Kowalski said. Lot of people involved in lucrative criminal enterprises have similar patterns, similar vehicles, similar attitudes about their assets. They maintain their vehicles because they're using them to project status, to show success, to indicate that they're doing well financially. That's a known indicator. I'm not involved in any criminal enterprise, Shaw said. You've asked me directly. I've answered directly. I'm exercising my right to refuse further questioning. You wouldn't tell me if you were. That's the thing about this. I need to verify independently. I'm going to need to search the vehicle. "Do you have probable cause?" Shaw asked. Kowalski's jaw tightened. He was silent for a moment. "The condition of the vehicle, your evasiveness about your employment, your possession of significant assets, your presence in this neighborhood, these are all indicators," Kowalski said. "Those aren't indicators of probable cause," Shaw said. His voice remained calm, but there was an edge now, an awareness that he was dealing with someone determined to fabricate justification for an illegal search. Probable cause requires specific, articulable facts that suggest criminal activity. Owning a nice vehicle is not a crime, not in this country. Refusing to provide personal employment details is not suspicious. It's a constitutional right. Remaining calm during a traffic stop is not evasive behavior. It's the appropriate response. "I'm asking for your consent to search," Kowalski said. "I don't consent. I explicitly decline consent to search. You can document that I have refused consent. Your refusal is suspicious. If you have nothing to hide, you wouldn't object to a simple search. Law-abiding citizens cooperate." "Law-abiding citizens also have Fourth Amendment rights," Shaw said. "I'm declining consent. That's my right. I'm not obstructing anything. I'm exercising Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search." Kowalski was silent for a moment longer. His Bodycam captured his expression hardening, the moment when frustration turned into something else, into determination, into the decision that he would proceed regardless of the response he received. "I'm going to search this vehicle," he said. "You can cooperate or not, your choice, but I will search it." "You don't have probable cause," Shaw said. "Searching without probable cause or consent would be an illegal search. Any evidence discovered would be inadmissible, and you would be in violation of federal civil rights statutes regarding unlawful detention and unreasonable search." "I'll be the judge of what's legal," Kowalski said. "I've been doing this 11 years. I know what suspicious looks like, and this looks suspicious. Everything about this situation looks suspicious." He reached toward the door handle of the SUV.
Shaw raised his hand. "Stop," he said. His voice was firm, but not raised. "I need to show you something." Kowalski paused. His hand froze on the door handle. "I'm reaching for my credentials," Shaw said. "Federal credentials. Please don't misinterpret my movement. I'm reaching for my jacket pocket. Slowly." He moved his hand with exaggerated deliberation, understanding the dynamics of the moment, understanding that sudden movements could be misinterpreted, understanding that this was a critical juncture where miscommunication could create serious consequences. He retrieved a leather credential case from his jacket, federal seal embossed on the front in gold. The case was worn from years of use. It was clearly official. He opened it slowly. The badge was visible. Federal, official, gold and silver with the distinctive DEA seal. The photograph inside matched the man standing in front of Kowalski. The name read Marcus Shaw. The title read Administrator, Drug Enforcement Administration. The credential was current, valid. Everything about it was authentic. Kowalski's face went completely blank. His hand dropped from the door handle. His entire posture changed, not into deference, but into something closer to shock. The realization that the situation had shifted in ways he couldn't control. The understanding that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "I am the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration," Shaw said calmly. His voice remained steady and measured. "This vehicle is a secure federal vehicle used for my official duties. You are currently in violation of federal statutes regarding obstruction of federal operations. You have detained a federal officer without legal justification. You have attempted to fabricate justification for an illegal search, and you have done all of this while I remained calm, compliant, and cooperative." A second vehicle pulled up behind the patrol vehicle. Two federal agents, part of Shaw's security detail, emerged and approached Kowalski's patrol car. They weren't aggressive, they were professional. Their identification was visible, their authority was clear, their presence was unmistakable.
This interaction is now being documented by federal security personnel. Your body cam footage is being retained as evidence of federal civil rights violations. Your patrol vehicle's in-car camera footage is being secured, and this matter is being reported to the highest levels of federal law enforcement authority. The FBI's Civil Rights Division will be conducting a parallel investigation. Kowalski's supervisor, Captain David Rodriguez, arrived within 8 minutes. Rodriguez understood immediately from the federal presence what had occurred. He had been on the force for 22 years. He knew the protocol for federal involvement. He knew the implications. He pulled Kowalski aside and spoke to him in low, urgent tones, while Shaw remained standing near his vehicle, calmly but visibly separate from the interaction. Rodriguez's face showed the strain of understanding the magnitude of what had just occurred under his officer's command. Federal agents took custody of Kowalski's body cam. They took Kowalski's patrol vehicle's in-car camera footage. They photographed Kowalski's uniform and weapon. They documented the exact location of the traffic stop, the time, 3:18 p.m., the duration, 11 minutes and 43 seconds, and the complete absence of any articulated traffic violation that had preceded the stop.
They interviewed Shaw on scene, taking a comprehensive statement about the interaction. They obtained his security details observations. They documented the condition of his vehicle and the legitimacy of his registration. Within 12 minutes, calls were being made to the police department's chain of command. The chief of police was notified by Captain Rodriguez. The city's legal department was notified by the chief of police. The city manager was notified. By 3:47 p.m., the DEA's Inspector General office had been contacted directly by Shaw's federal security detail. By 4:05 p.m., the FBI's Civil Rights Division had received formal notification. By 4:15 p.m., the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Section had been contacted. Kowalski was removed from the traffic stop and placed in his patrol car. He was driven back to the police station without being read his rights. He wasn't under arrest, but he was effectively detained for questioning. His badge was secured. His weapon was secured. He was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Shaw was escorted back to his vehicle by federal agents. The security detail confirmed the integrity of the vehicle. No tampering, no damage, no evidence collection performed. Shaw was driven home in a follow-up vehicle while federal personnel documented everything about the initial traffic stop. Photographs, measurements, the exact location where he had stood, the trajectory of Kowalski's sight lines. The body cam footage showed exactly what had occurred: the casual racism, the assumption of criminality based on wealth and race, the pressure for a search without legal justification, the refusal to accept legitimate reasons for declining to provide more information, the repeated returns to the vehicle's condition as evidence of suspicion. All of it documented, all of it recorded, all of it preserved as evidence of bias and civil rights violation. Internal Affairs opened an investigation into James Kowalski before he even returned to the police station. The investigation focused on this single interaction, but investigators immediately began pulling his complete record. They reviewed his previous traffic stops systematically. They examined patterns in his stops over the past 11 years of employment. What they found was striking and systematic. Over the past 3 years specifically, 73% of Kowalski's traffic stops involved black drivers. Over the past 5 years, the percentage was 68%. Of the stops involving black drivers, only 18% resulted in citations or warnings. 37% resulted in searches being requested without probable cause. Of those searches for which documentation existed, drug paraphernalia or cash was allegedly discovered in 40% of cases. The pattern suggested that Kowalski's searches were targeting specific demographics and that when documentation was unavailable or incomplete, he had discretion to claim discoveries that may not have actually occurred. The pattern suggested systematic bias. Internal Affairs submitted its initial findings within 5 days. The investigation was thorough and detailed. The conclusion was unambiguous that Kowalski had engaged in bias-based policing, unlawful detention of citizens, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, and conduct unbecoming of an officer.
By the end of the second week, James Kowalski was terminated from the police department. The termination letter, more than 3 pages long, cited pattern bias in stop selection, violation of use of force policies, violation of civil rights protections, false statements in police reports, and conduct inconsistent with department values. His police certification was revoked by the state licensing board. The revocation was permanent. He would never work in law enforcement again. Any future employment would have to disclose the reason for his police decertification. Any background check would reveal the civil rights violations he had committed. Marcus Shaw filed a federal lawsuit against the city on personal grounds, not on behalf of the DEA. The lawsuit was filed in federal district court. It cited unlawful detention, violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, Fourth Amendment violations, and deliberate indifference to constitutional protections. The lawsuit specifically mentioned the pattern of bias evident in Kowalski's stop record over his employment history. The city's legal department immediately entered settlement negotiations. They understood the exposure. They understood the precedent a trial would create. They understood that litigating against the administrator of the DEA in federal court would be not just costly, but potentially devastating to the city's reputation and finances. Within 3 weeks, a settlement agreement was reached for $847,000. The settlement included no admission of liability from the city, standard language in such agreements. The settlement required mandatory training for all patrol officers on civil rights protections, Fourth Amendment requirements, and bias recognition. The settlement established a community oversight board to review patterns in traffic stops across the department. The police department released a brief public statement. "We have completed our investigation into a traffic stop conducted on October 15th. The officer involved in the stop has been terminated from employment. The department remains committed to professional conduct and constitutional compliance. We have implemented enhanced training and oversight mechanisms to prevent similar incidents in the future." No officer was named publicly, no details of the settlement were disclosed, no details of the allegations were specified. The statement was designed to limit damage while appearing responsive to the incident.
The story made regional news. Local media outlets reported federal officials subjected to unlawful traffic stop by local police. The coverage was brief and factual. The DEA issued no public statement regarding the incident. Marcus Shaw declined media interviews. His office emphasized that the matter was resolved and that they were moving forward. What wasn't reported publicly in any comprehensive way was the operational security complication the incident had created. Shaw's secured vehicle had been identified by a local police officer. The secure travel patterns from federal facilities to his residence had been compromised. Federal security protocols had to be reassessed. Alternative routes were established. New vehicles were arranged. The incident, while resolved quickly at the legal and administrative levels, had created lasting complications in ongoing federal operations. Resources that should have been dedicated to narcotics enforcement had to be redirected to security concerns. The broader pattern that the internal affairs investigation had identified wasn't addressed comprehensively by the settlement or the termination. How many other drivers had been stopped based on asset suspicion? How many searches had been conducted without probable cause? How many cases had been prosecuted based on alleged discoveries that may have been fabricated or that came from illegal searches? The city ordered a comprehensive audit of traffic stops from the past 5 years. The audit examined records from all patrol officers in the jurisdiction. It looked for patterns similar to those identified in Kowalski's record. The audit identified 147 stops by 6 different officers that showed similar patterns, similar demographics, similar search requests without articulated probable cause, similar alleged discoveries of contraband or cash. Of those 147 stops, 43 had resulted in arrests. Those 43 cases were reviewed systematically. 5 were identified as having evidence of constitutional violations. The individuals in those cases were offered the opportunity to have their convictions vacated if they wished to pursue it. 2 individuals accepted and had their convictions overturned. One had served 18 months in county jail on a drug possession conviction based on alleged evidence discovered during an unlawful search. He was released. He sued the city separately. That settlement was sealed and confidential. The other 3 individuals chose to remain convicted despite the identified constitutional violations. They believed that the cost of relitigation, the uncertainty of new trials, and the potential for continued prosecution made fighting the conviction more risky than accepting it. One individual who did accept had spent 18 months in county jail on a drug possession conviction based on alleged evidence discovered during an unlawful search. He was released immediately. He sued the city separately. That settlement was sealed and confidential. The amount was never disclosed. He was provided expungement of his record and was reinstated to his previous employment. The broader conversation about asset-based racial profiling didn't emerge from this incident in any sustained public way. The conversation about how wealth, particularly in the hands of people of color, triggers criminal suspicion from authority figures didn't become a public priority in policing reform discussions. What changed was specific and limited. One officer was terminated. One settlement was paid. One city implemented additional oversight. One set of cases was reviewed. One federal official had his civil rights vindicated. But the question remained unanswered. How many identical stops occur every day across the country where no federal credential is revealed, where the driver simply complies with an illegal search because they don't understand their rights, where the constitutional violation passes undocumented and unaddressed, where the system functions exactly as Kowalski believed it should, with authority unchecked and compliance assumed? Marcus Shaw returned to his work at the DEA. His operational security was reassessed. His travel protocols were modified. His security detail was expanded. He continued his duties as administrator, aware that this incident, this single traffic stop in a gated neighborhood lasting 11 minutes and 43 seconds, had exposed vulnerabilities in federal operational security and had forced a painful reckoning with the reality of how race and wealth intersected in law enforcement interactions. The vehicle remained in his personal possession. He continued to drive it. He understood that the stop, while resolved, had demonstrated how assumptions about wealth and race could override training, policy, and constitutional protections. He understood that he had been privileged by his federal position. He understood that most people didn't have that privilege. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if this story showed you something about asset-based profiling and the assumption that wealth equals guilt, hit subscribe, because what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness matters. It matters when federal authority has to assert itself against local law enforcement making unfounded assumptions. It matters when wealth, in certain hands, is treated as inherent guilt. And it matters most when the person being stopped has the power to hold the system accountable, because most people don't. This story ended with justice because one man had federal credentials and federal resources. But that raises the hardest question. What happens to everyone else? What happens to the person without credentials, without federal protection, without the resources to sue, without the institutional power to trigger investigations? That's where the real story is, and that's the story that doesn't get told until someone with power decides it's worth telling. See you in the next one.
Sir, I'm going to need you to move to economy.
What? This is my seat.
First class is for certain tickets. You're in the wrong section.
My boarding pass says 2A. You scanned it.
I don't think this is right. People don't just end up here.
Oh, so you think I can't afford the VIP? Call your supervisor.
Why?
Because you're about to make this real expensive, buddy.
At 10:28 a.m., during boarding at a Florida departure gate, a flight attendant believed she was enforcing cabin policy. She wasn't responding to a dispute. There was no seat confusion, no upgrade error, no raised voice. Just a black man, already seated in first class, quietly waiting. From her body cam, you can hear the certainty in her voice before the accusation even lands, the confidence of someone who believes access is hers to grant and revoke. She tells him he doesn't belong there, insists the seat must be wrong, suggests out loud that people don't just end up in first class.
Passengers go quiet. Phones tilt upward. What she doesn't know is that the man she's trying to remove isn't arguing because he's confused. He's measuring liability. He's letting the moment document itself. And when she calls for ground security instead of stepping back, she unknowingly triggers a civil rights case that will cost her job and her airline millions. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. These stories only matter if people see how they unfold. Flight 847 was a regional jet departing from Jacksonville to Miami. First-class boarding had begun at 10:15 a.m. The cabin was about 50% full, business travelers mostly, the predictable mid-morning crowd, a few retirees, one family, the normal distribution of a routine Tuesday flight. Elias Vance sat in seat 1B. He had boarded 8 minutes earlier, with his boarding pass scanned and verified at the gate agent's station. His seat assignment was legitimate. His ticket was purchased 3 days prior through the standard booking system. His frequent flyer account in good standing. Everything was documented in the airline's database. He sat quietly, reviewing his schedule on his phone. A meeting at 1 p.m. in Miami. Nothing unusual, nothing that required conversation or attention from anyone else on the aircraft. Stephanie Brennan was working first class that morning. 44 years old, 12 years with the airline. She had moved through the cabin making preliminary announcements, standard boarding procedures, safety information reminders, availability of beverage service when she noticed him. She stopped walking. She looked at his seat number, then at him, then back at the seat number displayed on her tablet. "I need you to move," she said. Not a greeting, not a question, a directive, a command issued from someone accustomed to being obeyed. Vance looked up from his phone. "I'm sorry," he said. "This seat, it's not right," Brennan said. She was already scanning the cabin as if looking for where he should actually be, as if searching for the correct destination for a man in a Navy suit who didn't belong in first class according to her calculations. First-class seats don't assign to, this section just isn't available for, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Other passengers had turned, not all of them, but enough to know that something was happening in the cabin, a moment, an interaction that wasn't routine. Phones began to angle upward casually, ostensibly to adjust seatbelts or retrieve items from overhead bins, but the cameras were recording. The moment was being documented before anyone could predict what would happen. "I have a valid first-class ticket," Vance said. His voice was level, measured, the tone of someone who probably explained himself many times before in many different contexts. "Seat 1B was my assigned seat at booking. It was scanned at the gate. I'm in the correct location." Brennan shook her head with certainty. "People don't just end up in first class. There has to be an upgrade, an error in the system, something, not just this." The cabin went quiet. The implication hung there without any ambiguity, without any alternative interpretation. Vance set his phone down on the armrest. He folded his hands on his lap. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand a supervisor or threaten a complaint. He simply waited, composed, still, letting the moment unfold at its own pace. "Let me check the system," Vance said calmly. "I can check the system," Brennan replied. But she didn't move. She stood in the aisle, her posture rigid, her expression certain, her tablet held loosely in one hand like a scepter. "I know how booking works, and this isn't how it works. This isn't normal. You don't just book first class like it's—" She trailed off again. The sentence didn't need completion. Vance remained seated.
Brennan pulled out her tablet with renewed purpose. The airline's booking system displayed on her screen. She tapped through passenger manifests, her fingers moving with mechanical confidence. The display scrolled. Names appeared and disappeared, flight assignments, seat numbers, ticket types. "Your name?" she asked, not looking at him. "Elias Vance," he said. She searched. Her fingers moved across the touchscreen. The results displayed clearly. Seat 1B, first class, valid ticket. Purchase date from 3 days prior. Booking confirmation number visible. everything verified by the airline's own system. She looked at the screen, then at Vance, then back at the screen again, as if expecting the information to change, as if the system might correct itself and produce a different answer. "There's an error," she said finally. Her voice had a different quality now, defensive, doubtful, but still holding authority. "The system shows a mistake, an error in the assignment. I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy." "The system shows no error," Vance said calmly. He was still seated, still composed, still not raising his voice. "It shows my seat assignment, my booking, my ticket, which is valid, and I'm in the seat that corresponds to that ticket. I'm in seat 1B, as assigned." "That's not how this works," Brennan said. Her voice had hardened now. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was authority being questioned. This was someone with service power, the ability to control who sat where on this aircraft, being told that her assumptions were wrong. "I've been doing this for 12 years. I know when something doesn't match, and you don't match. This doesn't match." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Every passenger in first class understood what she meant, understood the distance between what the system said and what Brennan believed to be true. Vance looked at her directly. His expression didn't change. "I'm not moving." His voice remained calm, factual, unemotional. "If there's a policy question, we can address it. If there's confusion about my booking, we can resolve it. But I have a valid ticket. I'm in my assigned seat. I'm not causing any disruption. I'm not being disruptive or loud. I'm sitting quietly, and I'm not leaving." Brennan's jaw tightened. A muscle worked in her cheek. The moment was slipping away from her. The control she expected to exercise, the simple ability to tell a passenger to move and have them obey, was not being granted. "Stay here," she said. "I'm calling a supervisor." She walked toward the flight deck. Her hand moved to her radio. Vance could hear her voice, though not the words specifically. He could see the glances from other passengers, the businessman in 2A, the woman in 1C still recording. He could feel the weight of the moment, the documentation of it happening in real time on at least 4 phones pointed in his direction. The cabin stayed quiet. Nobody spoke, nobody moved, just waiting, just watching, just recording. Brennan returned 3 minutes later with Thomas Graves, the lead flight attendant for the flight. Graves was 56, black, with 23 years of seniority at the airline. He had seen discrimination before. He had probably witnessed it in the industry multiple times. He knew what was happening before he even asked a question. He looked at Brennan, then at Vance, then at the seat assignment on her tablet. "What's the issue here?" Graves asked, his voice steady and professional. "He says he has a first-class ticket," Brennan said quickly, as if speed would lend credibility to her complaint. "But the booking doesn't make sense. The purchase doesn't match the normal pattern. I think there's an error in the system, a glitch, something." Graves looked at the tablet. He saw the same manifest, same seat, same valid ticket. The information was unambiguous. "His ticket is valid," Graves said simply. "But," Brennan started, her voice rising slightly. "His ticket is valid," Graves repeated more firmly. "He's in his assigned seat. There's no issue here, no error. The system is working correctly." Brennan's face flushed, a deep red that spread from her neck to her cheeks. "He should have upgraded," she said, the words coming faster now, defensive, doubtful but still holding authority. "People don't just book first class unless they're—" "His ticket is valid," Graves said a third time. His tone was final. He looked directly at Vance. "You're fine. Stay seated. We'll be pushing back shortly. Everything is in order." He walked away. Brennan stood motionless in the aisle for a moment, the tablet still in her hands, the validation she sought still missing. Then she turned back to her boarding duties. Her movements were mechanical now. Her previous confidence was replaced by something else, awareness, perhaps, or dread about what she had just initiated. The phones continued recording.
The footage would later be uploaded to multiple platforms, shared hundreds of thousands of times, analyzed by aviation experts, civil rights advocates, and ordinary people who recognized immediately what had occurred. Boarding continued. First class filled slowly. Seats 2A, 2B, and 2C were occupied by a trio of software engineers heading to a Miami conference. Seat 3A held a woman who worked in pharmaceutical sales. Seat 3B was empty. By 10:52 a.m., the cabin door was sealed. The aircraft was fully boarded. The crew prepared for pushback. Vance was still seated in 1B. Brennan avoided eye contact with him for the entire pre-flight safety demonstration. She moved through the cabin, pointing out exit rows and oxygen masks, her movements precise but disconnected. She didn't look at him. She didn't acknowledge him. She performed her duties with the mechanical efficiency of someone who was now acutely aware of the recording devices surrounding her moment of error. At 11:03 a.m., as the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway, Vance unfastened his seatbelt. He reached into his carry-on bag, slowly, deliberately, every movement deliberate and visible to the nearby passengers who were watching him. He removed a leather credential case, federal, official, the kind of badge holder that law enforcement carries. He opened it carefully. The badge was visible, federal, official. The photograph matched his face. The name read Elias Vance. The title read Chief of Police, Federal Security Service, Miami Division. The credentials were current. Everything was in order. He held it for a moment, letting it rest on his armrest so any nearby passenger could see it clearly. The badge gleamed under the cabin lighting, unmistakable, authoritative, federal. Then he carefully returned it to his bag. He refastened his seatbelt. He returned his attention to his phone. The cabin didn't gasp audibly. There was no dramatic reaction, but the shift was palpable. The woman in 1C, who had been recording on her phone, lowered her device and stared forward, her mouth slightly open. The businessman across the aisle in 2A caught the moment, and his expression changed from casual curiosity to understanding. The pharmaceutical sales rep in 3A turned to look at him, her eyes wide. The recognition was spreading through first class like a wave. The man they had been watching, the man who hadn't moved, the man who had remained calm while being told he didn't belong. He carried federal credentials. He was a police chief. Brennan was serving water in first class. She was moving methodically through the cabin, her tablet tucked under her arm, when she noticed Vance examining his credential. She saw him open the case. She saw the badge. She saw him return it to his bag. She froze completely. Her hand, which had been moving toward the businessman's water cup, stopped mid-motion. Her face went pale, not from shock, from recognition. She knew what she had just done. She understood in that moment the magnitude of her assumption. She knew who he was now. She knew that the moment was being documented. She knew that her termination was likely. She continued serving water with shaking hands. Her movements were now jerky and uncertain. She moved to the next passenger, then the next, methodically completing her task while aware that her career was probably ending. Thomas Graves noticed the shift in cabin energy. He had been in the galley, preparing beverages, when he sensed something had changed. The dynamic, the atmosphere, the awareness of something significant having occurred. He moved through the cabin and noticed Vance's credentials still visible on his armrest, the federal badge, the title, the name. Everything became clear. Graves approached Vance's seat carefully. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked, his voice low and respectful, the tone of someone addressing someone of authority. "I'm fine," Vance said, "comfortable. Thank you for your intervention earlier. Your colleague made an assumption. You corrected it." Graves understood immediately what had happened. He understood the full scope of what Brennan had initiated. "I apologize for any confusion,"
Graves said carefully, "and I apologize for my colleague's conduct." "There was no confusion," Vance said. "Your colleague made an assumption about who belongs in first class, and she acted on that assumption without verification. I showed her my boarding pass, I explained my seat assignment, and she still insisted I was wrong. That's not confusion, that's bias." Graves nodded. He understood completely. He excused himself and moved to the flight deck. What followed was a cascade of communication. The captain was notified immediately. The airline's operations center in Jacksonville was called. The airline's legal department was contacted. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude at 28,000 feet, there was an active incident report being filed in the airline's system, an incident report that would eventually be escalated to corporate headquarters. Graves requested that Brennan cease service in first class. She was moved to the rear cabin for the remainder of the flight. She worked in silence, aware that something massive had just become unavoidable, aware that her shift in attitude, from confident to nervous, was visible to everyone around her. At 11:47 a.m., as the aircraft began its descent toward Miami International, the captain made an announcement. No details, no explanation, no apology, just notification that the airline would be contacting passengers who had boarded this flight. The moment the aircraft landed and the door was opened, 4 company security personnel were waiting at the gate. Vance was met as he deplaned. The lead security officer introduced himself formally and provided contact information for the airline's legal department. "We understand there was an incident during boarding," the officer said carefully. The language was neutral. The understanding of what had occurred was evident. "There was," Vance said, "and I'll be filing a formal complaint." The Bodycam footage from Brennan's uniform was immediately flagged in the airline's system. The airline's legal department reviewed it within hours. The footage was clear. The conversation was audible. The bias was documented in full detail. Every word, every gesture, every assumption made by Brennan without verification. Passenger cell phone footage was also being collected. The airline's legal department was already contacting the people who had recorded the interaction, requesting the files as part of their investigation. By midnight on the same day, 6 different recordings existed in the airline's possession, all showing the same interaction, all showing Brennan's assumptions and accusations, all showing Vance's restraint and composure. The evidence was overwhelming. The investigation took 72 hours. Stephanie Brennan was called into a meeting with Human Resources and the regional manager at 8 a.m. on Monday. The meeting took place in a corporate office in Jacksonville. She was shown the Bodycam footage. She was asked to provide her account of what had occurred. She claimed she had been concerned about an actual booking error. She claimed she had been doing her job properly. She claimed she had not intended any disrespect or discrimination. The evidence contradicted everything she said. The Bodycam clearly captured her statement, "People don't just end up in first class." There was no ambiguity. There was no alternative interpretation available. The footage showed exactly what had happened, the assumptions, the refusal to verify information that was available to her, the insistence that the system was wrong, even when it clearly confirmed the passenger's legitimacy. At 3:15 p.m. on Monday, Stephanie Brennan was informed that her employment had been terminated effective immediately. The termination letter cited violation of the company's diversity and inclusion policy, failure to verify credentials before making accusations, conduct unbecoming of a flight attendant, and violation of federal anti-discrimination regulations. Her union declined to fight the termination. They reviewed the footage. They consulted with legal counsel. They knew the case was indefensible. There was no argument that could overcome the recorded evidence of what had occurred.
By Tuesday morning, Elias Vance had filed a formal civil rights complaint with the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation. He cited discrimination based on race and color. He cited denial of services based on protected characteristics. He cited the hostile environment created aboard a federally regulated aircraft. He cited violations of the Civil Rights Act. The complaint was received at 9:47 a.m. Tuesday. By noon, the FAA had opened an investigation into the airline's compliance with civil rights regulations and passenger protection policies. The airline issued a statement by 2 p.m. "We take all allegations of discrimination seriously. We have zero tolerance for conduct that violates our values or violates federal law. The team member involved in this incident is no longer employed by our company. We will cooperate fully with all regulatory investigations. We are reaching out to the affected passenger to discuss appropriate remedies and next steps." The statement avoided admitting liability. It also avoided denying the obvious reality of what had occurred. It was corporate language designed to protect the bottom line while acknowledging the reality of documented misconduct. By Friday, 3 separate investigations were underway: the FAA investigation, the Department of Transportation investigation, and a parallel civil rights investigation by the Department of Justice. Stephanie Brennan's termination made local news. The headline read, "Flight attendant fired for denying first-class access to black police chief." The story spread across multiple news platforms. Passenger videos were uploaded to social media and viewed millions of times. Aviation industry watchdogs cited the incident as symptomatic of a broader problem with bias in customer service. The airline's stock price dipped 2.3% on heavy trading volume. Investors expressed concern about the company's culture and potential liability exposure.
Stephanie Brennan's termination made local news. The headline read, "Flight attendant fired for denying first-class access to black police chief." The story spread across multiple news platforms. Passenger videos were uploaded to social media and viewed millions of times. Aviation industry watchdogs cited the incident as symptomatic of a broader problem with bias in customer service. The airline's stock price dipped 2.3% on heavy trading volume. Investors expressed concern about the company's culture and potential liability exposure. The airline announced mandatory training on unconscious bias for all frontline staff. They established a formal review process for decisions about passenger seat assignments. They created an anonymous hotline for employees to report discriminatory behavior by colleagues. They appointed a vice president of diversity and inclusion to oversee cultural change. These were reactive measures, damage control, systems designed to prevent future incidents and limit legal exposure. But they happened only because the moment had been documented and publicly exposed, only because the evidence was irrefutable. Elias Vance settled his case with the airline for $1.2 million. The settlement included no admission of liability. It also included no defense of what had occurred. The money was paid, the case was closed, the agreement was sealed and made confidential. But the footage was not confidential. It had been recorded. It had been shared. It existed in the public record now. It would be used in training seminars. It would be referenced in articles about bias in customer service. It would become a case study in what happens when assumptions override verification. Stephanie Brennan filed for unemployment benefits and was denied. She appealed the denial and was denied again on the grounds that her termination was for cause. There was no severance, no transition benefits, no safety net. She moved back in with her parents in Ohio and found work at a retail company. The seat that Elias Vance occupied on Flight 847, Seat 1B, remained available to him every time he flew on that airline. It was never denied to another passenger based on race. It was never denied based on appearance. The policy held, at least on paper, at least for now. But the question lingered in the industry.
How many identical moments occur every day in airports across the country where no documentation exists, where no badge is revealed, where the passenger simply moves to economy quietly and accepts the humiliation, where the airline faces no consequences because there is no proof, where the discrimination continues unchecked because the moment was not recorded. The story didn't end with vindication. It didn't end with justice. It ended with a settlement check. It ended with a terminated employee. It ended with an airline making statements about culture change while the broader system remained fundamentally unchanged. The underlying problem persisted. The assumption that certain people don't belong in certain spaces, the belief that access is something that must be earned or approved by those in positions of service authority, the idea that verification can be ignored if someone's presence contradicts expectations. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and if this story revealed something about access and bias you hadn't considered before, hit subscribe. Because what happens when authority is documented matters, even when the system pretends it doesn't, even when the broader patterns continue unchanged, even when settlement checks arrive and cases are closed and life returns to normal. The footage remains, the evidence persists, and maybe, just maybe, the next time someone makes an assumption, they'll remember this story. They'll remember Stephanie Brennan losing her job. They'll remember the Bodycam footage played across millions of screens. They'll remember that the person in front of them might have proof, that documentation exists, that bias, when recorded, has consequences. That's the only real accountability that emerged from this incident. Not systemic change, not cultural transformation, just the knowledge that if you're wrong and if someone is recording, you will be exposed. See you in the next one.
Police, step back. We need to search the house.
You just kicked in my door. Where's your warrant?
We had a tip. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
Tip doesn't let you break into my home.
Who else is in here?
No one. And you're recording a felony right now.
What?
I'm a federal prosecutor. Step out of my apartment now.
At exactly 6:42 a.m. on a weekday morning, 3 local police officers thought they were about to act on a routine anonymous tip. What they didn't know was that they were about to kick in the door of a man whose job was holding other people's cases together in federal court. They believed they were entering the apartment of a suspect. Instead, they forced their way into the home of someone who understood the law better than their entire shift combined. The man standing inside that apartment wasn't afraid of raised voices or flashing badges. He wasn't scrambling to hide anything. He was already documenting, already calculating jurisdiction, already watching their careers unravel in real time. And in the next 25 minutes, those officers wouldn't just violate the Fourth Amendment. They would compromise active federal prosecutions, obstruct protected duties, and create a paper trail so clean, so complete, that termination was inevitable. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. Stories like this only matter if people see how they actually unfold. The timestamp on the hallway security camera reads 6:14 a.m. The corridor is empty. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. 3 doors are visible in frame. Apartment 4C sits at the end. The door is closed, locked, undisturbed. Then 3 figures appear from the stairwell. They move quickly, purposefully, no hesitation. They wear street clothes under tactical vests, badges clipped to belts, weapons holstered but visible. Officers conducting what they believe is legitimate police work. They stop outside 4C. No knock, no announcement, no pause to verify the unit number against any documentation they might have or should have. One officer produces a battering ram, a compact steel cylinder with handles, the kind used for force entry. He swings.
The impact is immediate and violent. The door frame cracks, the lock mechanism twists. The second hit splinters wood around the deadbolt. The third blow sends the door crashing inward, slamming against the interior wall with enough force to dent the drywall behind it. The officers enter immediately, weapons drawn now, flashlights cutting through the dim morning interior. "Police, nobody move!" Inside, a man sits at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He's wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. His laptop is open in front of him. Papers are spread across the surface. He's been awake for maybe 20 minutes. He doesn't move. His hands stay flat on the table, fingers spread, palms down. The officers fan out through the apartment. One heads toward the bedroom, another checks the bathroom, the third stays focused on the man at the table. "Put your hands behind your head, now!" The man complies slowly. His expression shows confusion, not fear, not guilt, just the blank incomprehension of someone trying to understand what's happening. "What's this about?" "Keep your mouth shut." The interior security camera mounted near the ceiling captures everything. Wide angle, clear resolution, timestamp running in the corner. The forced entry, the drawn weapons, the resident complying with every command.
The officer searching the bedroom returns. "Nothing back there." The officer who checked the bathroom shakes his head. "Clear." The third officer holsters his weapon and approaches the table. He sees the laptop, the papers, the coffee cup still steaming. "What are you doing up so early?" "Working." "Working on what?" "Case files. I work from home sometimes." "What kind of cases?" The man doesn't answer immediately. He's calculating, trying to understand the legal ground he's standing on, trying to figure out what they think they're here for. "Am I under arrest?" "We're investigating." "Investigating what?" "We got a tip about this apartment." "What kind of tip?" The officer doesn't answer. He walks past the kitchen table toward a doorway leading to a second room. The door is partially open. He pushes it wider and steps inside. What happens when police decide procedure is optional? The second room is clearly an office. A desk against one wall, filing cabinets, a printer, shelves lined with binders and reference materials, a second computer setup more complex than the laptop in the kitchen. The officer starts opening drawers, pulls out files, scans covers without reading contents. He's looking for something specific but can't articulate what. Drugs, weapons, evidence of whatever crime the anonymous tip suggested. From the kitchen, the man's voice carries through. "Do you have a warrant?" The officer in the office doesn't respond. He continues searching. At the table, one of the other officers pulls out his phone, scrolls through something, notes maybe, or the original tip information. Whatever he's reading doesn't include a warrant number or court approval. "Sir, I need to see some identification." The man at the table keeps his hands behind his head. "My wallet is in my bedroom, on the dresser." "Stay here." The officer walks toward the bedroom, returns a moment later with a leather wallet, opens it, pulls out a driver's license. The name on the license is Elijah Grant. The address matches the apartment number. Everything is current, legal, ordinary. But the officer's expression doesn't change. He's not looking for confirmation that this is the right apartment. He's looking for something that justifies the entry they've already made. In the office, the other officer opens a filing cabinet. The drawers are organized, labeled, color-coded tabs marking different sections. He pulls out a binder at random, opens it, sees pages of typed documents, legal formatting, case numbers, witness statements. He closes it and pulls out another. More documents, more legal language, nothing that looks like contraband or criminal evidence. But he doesn't stop searching. He's committed now. They kicked the door in. They entered with force. Leaving without finding something means admitting they had no reason to be here. At the table, Elijah lowers his hands slowly. "I asked you a question. Do you have a warrant?" We're conducting an investigation. That's not an answer. Do you have a signed warrant authorizing you to enter this apartment? We received a tip. Tips don't replace warrants. You need probable cause and judicial approval to force entry into someone's home. Do you have that? The officer's jaw tightens. He doesn't like being questioned, doesn't like having to explain his authority to a civilian. We have reason to believe there's criminal activity at this address. What criminal activity specifically? That's part of the investigation. Then you should have gotten a warrant before breaking down my door. The officer from the office emerges. He's holding one of the binders. What's all this legal stuff? Elijah looks at him. Case files. For what? Work. What kind of work? Legal work. You a lawyer? I'm a federal prosecutor. The room goes quiet. The officers exchange glances. One of them shifts his weight uncomfortably. The other sets the binder down on the kitchen counter and pulls out his radio. Why do assumptions feel safer to authority than verification? The officer with the radio speaks quietly into it, too quiet for the security camera audio to pick up clearly. He's calling someone, a supervisor probably, someone who can tell him what to do now that the situation has shifted. Elijah stands slowly from the table. His movements are deliberate, non-threatening. He walks toward the office doorway and stops just outside, looking in at the open filing cabinets and displaced binders. You need to stop searching. The officer nearest him tenses. Sit back down. Those are federal case files, active prosecutions. You're contaminating evidence. We're conducting a lawful search. No, you're not. You don't have a warrant. You don't have consent. You don't have probable cause. And now you're handling materials related to federal criminal cases. That's obstruction. The officer who made the radio call steps between Elijah and the office. Sir, we need you to calm down. I am calm. I'm telling you that you've crossed a line you don't understand. This isn't just a Fourth Amendment violation anymore. You're interfering with federal prosecutions. We're just looking. Looking without a warrant is still a search. Touching case files without authorization is still contamination. Every second you're in this apartment, you're making this worse. One of the officers finally asks the question that should have been asked before the door was kicked in. Can you prove you're a federal prosecutor? My credentials are in the office, in the desk, top drawer. I'll get them if you step back. The officers don't move. They're uncertain now. The confidence that carried them through the forced entry is evaporating. They're starting to realize they might have made a catastrophic mistake. Elijah doesn't wait for permission. He walks into the office, opens the desk drawer, and pulls out a leather credential case. He opens it and holds it up. United States Department of Justice, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Northern District. His photograph, his name, the federal seal embossed in gold. The credentials are unmistakable, authentic, official. The officer who's been doing most of the talking takes the case and examines it. His hands aren't quite steady. He's looking at federal identification that proves the man whose door they just kicked in has the authority to prosecute them. This could be fake. It's not. Elijah's voice is flat, factual. There's a verification number on the back. You can call the main Justice Department line. They'll confirm my identity and employment. The officer hands the credentials back without calling. He knows they're real. He just doesn't want to accept what that means. At what moment does a bad search become a federal offense?
Elijah walks past the officers and picks up his phone from the kitchen table. He dials a number from memory. The call connects after 2 rings. Federal Protected Service, how may I assist you? This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Elijah Grant, badge number 7294. My home office has been breached by local police without a warrant. I need documentation and response. Confirming your location, Mr. Grant. Apartment 4C, 1847 Riverside Avenue. Are you currently safe? I'm not in immediate danger. 3 officers are present. They forced entry at approximately 6:14 this morning. They're currently searching case materials without authorization. Hold for supervisor notification. Elijah puts the phone on speaker and sets it on the table. The voice of the Federal Protective Service operator is audible to everyone in the room. Mr. Grant, we're logging this incident and notifying your supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Are the officers still conducting the search? Yes. Have they identified themselves or provided warrant documentation? They've identified as police. No warrant has been shown. One of the officers steps forward. Sir, we need you to end that call. No. That's an order. You don't have authority to order me to stop reporting a federal violation. The operator's voice comes through clearly. Mr. Grant, federal response is being coordinated. Please remain on the line and document everything verbally for the record. Elijah looks directly at the officer who told him to end the call. Your names, badge numbers, which department you're with, all of it needs to be documented. The officers don't respond. They're frozen, caught between continuing to assert authority they don't have and backing down in a way that admits the entire entry was unlawful. The officer who checked Elijah's credentials finally speaks. We were responding to a tip about suspicious activity. What suspicious activity? The tip said there were drugs at this address. Did the tip specify this unit number? It said apartment 4C. Did you verify that before entry? Silence. Did you confirm with building management that this was the correct unit? Did you conduct any surveillance? Did you attempt to get a warrant? More silence. You kicked in the door of a federal prosecutor's home office based on an anonymous tip you didn't verify. You contaminated active case files. You searched without consent or judicial authorization. And you did all of this while being recorded. Elijah points to the security camera in the corner, then to another one mounted near the office doorway. Interior cameras, hallway cameras, all networked, all cloud-backed, time-stamped. Everything you've done is documented. The officer nearest the door pulls out his radio again. This time he doesn't bother keeping his voice down. Dispatch, we need a supervisor at 1847 Riverside, apartment 4C. Immediate response. Why does authority panic when it finally meets oversight?
A supervisor arrives 11 minutes later. Sergeant Rebecca Ortiz, 21 years on the force. She takes one look at the broken doorframe and her expression hardens. She steps inside and immediately sees Elijah standing near the kitchen table with his federal credentials visible. She sees the officers standing awkwardly in the small space. She sees the open filing cabinets and displaced case binders in the office. Who authorized this entry? The officer who's been leading the search hands her a printed incident sheet. Anonymous tip came in at 0454, reported drug activity at this address. Where's the warrant? We made a tactical decision to enter based on the tip. Ortiz looks at the paper, looks at the officers, looks at Elijah. Sir, can you identify yourself? Assistant U.S. Attorney Elijah Grant, Northern District. This is my residence and approved home office. These officers forced entry without a warrant and contaminated federal case materials. Ortiz closes her eyes briefly. Then she turns to her officers. Outside, all of you, now. They file out into the hallway. Ortiz stays behind for a moment. Mr. Grant, I apologize for what happened here. I need to secure the scene and document everything. Are you willing to provide a statement? I already have. Federal Protective Service has been notified. The U.S. Attorney's Office is sending representatives. Your officer's body cameras will be subpoenaed as evidence in both administrative and civil proceedings. Understood. Ortiz pulls out her notebook. For my immediate report, did any officer present a warrant or request consent before entry? No. Did they announce themselves before forcing the door? No. The first sound I heard was the battering ram. And the case files they were handling, are those related to active prosecutions? Yes, 3 active cases, all at sensitive stages, all requiring chain of custody documentation. Your officer's presence here will need to be disclosed to defense counsel. It could compromise months of investigative work. Ortiz makes notes without comment. She knows what this means. She knows the disciplinary process that's about to unfold. She knows that 3 officers just ended their careers by kicking in the wrong door. Federal representatives arrive within 30 minutes. 2 from the Inspector General's office. 1 from the U.S. Attorney's Internal Security Division. They photograph the broken door. They document the disturbed case files. They interview Elijah while the officers wait in the hallway. The evidence chain is immediate and irrefutable. 6:14 a.m., forced entry captured on hallway camera. 6:14:22, officers enter without warrant announcement. 6:16, search of secured office begins. 6:23, Federal Protective Service notified. 6:25, officers informed of residents' identity and position. 6:25, search continues despite notification. 6:30, supervisor arrives. By noon, all 3 officers are placed on administrative leave. Their service weapons are secured. Their badge access is suspended. They're instructed not to discuss the incident with anyone outside official channels. By 3 p.m., Internal Affairs has opened a formal investigation. The charges being reviewed: unlawful entry without warrant or exigent circumstances, failure to verify tip information before forced entry, contamination of federal evidence, continued search after identification of federal authority, obstruction of federal duties, potential civil rights violations. By end of business day, the story reaches local media. The headlines are vague but damaging. Police raid federal prosecutor's home by mistake. The details are sealed pending investigation, but the implication is clear. If this footage didn't exist, who would the system protect?
The civil rights lawsuit is filed within 2 weeks. Elijah's attorney is methodical. The complaint runs 43 pages. Every constitutional violation is cited. Every procedural failure is documented. Every second of security camera footage is referenced with timestamps. The lawsuit names all 3 officers individually. It names the city. It names the police department as an institution. It alleges Fourth Amendment violations, unlawful search and seizure, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, obstruction of federal prosecutions, 18 U.S.C. Section 1505, negligence in training and supervision, emotional distress and professional harm. The city attorney reviews the case and immediately understands the problem. The officers had no warrant. The tip was anonymous and unverified. The search continued even after the resident identified himself as a federal prosecutor. Everything is on camera. Defense counsel tries to argue exigent circumstances, but there were none. No one was in danger. No evidence was being destroyed. No fleeing suspect was being pursued. It was just an anonymous tip about possible drug activity. Not enough to justify a no-knock entry under any legal standard. They try to argue good faith exception, but the officers never attempted to get a warrant, never conducted surveillance, never verified the tip. Good faith requires reasonable effort. This was just assumption and force. The settlement negotiations begin 6 weeks after filing. The city offers $400,000. Elijah's attorney counters with $950,000.
The city increases to $600,000. The attorney holds at $950,000. The case is too clear. The footage is too damaging. A jury would side with Elijah overwhelmingly. The city would face not just compensatory damages, but potentially punitive damages for such a clear violation. They settle at $875,000, paid from the city's general liability fund. No admission of wrongdoing in the settlement language, but the payment speaks for itself. The settlement includes mandatory reforms. All forced entries require warrant approval unless life is in imminent danger. Anonymous tips must be corroborated before action. Officers must complete annual training on federal jurisdiction and Fourth Amendment law. All home entries must be reviewed by supervisory staff within 24 hours. Independent Civilian Review Board established for excessive force and unlawful entry complaints. The 3 officers are terminated 8 weeks after the incident. Internal Affairs concludes they violated department policy, state law, and federal law. Their peace officer certifications are revoked by the state board. They're barred from law enforcement work anywhere in the state. Sergeant Ortiz, who was not present during the raid but responded afterward, receives a formal written reprimand for failing to immediately order the scene secured and the search stopped. She completes remedial training and remains on the force. Elijah returns to work after the case files are recertified and chain of custody is reestablished. Defense attorneys in his active cases are notified of the incident. 2 cases proceed without issue. 1 case requires additional evidentiary hearings to confirm no contamination occurred. All 3 eventually result in convictions. The broken door frame is replaced. The security system is upgraded. Federal approval for the Home Office is renewed with additional protocols. But something remains broken that can't be fixed with wood and locks. Elijah gives one statement to the press, brief, factual. The officers who entered my home had no warrant, no probable cause, and no reason to believe I was engaged in criminal activity. They made assumptions, they skipped procedure, and they violated constitutional rights that exist to protect all of us. The settlement and terminations don't undo what happened. They just prove that when violations are documented, consequences can follow. He doesn't say what everyone reading between the lines understands. Most people don't have federal credentials. Most people don't have security cameras. Most people don't have attorneys who can force accountability. Most people just have a broken door and a story no one believes. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. Stories like this expose what happens when procedure fails and documentation saves lives. The case ends not with celebration, but with proof that rights only survive when violations are recorded. The officers gambled that no one would challenge them, that force would be enough, that an anonymous tip was sufficient justification. They were wrong. The cameras caught everything. The credentials proved authority. The system for once held people accountable. But the door was still kicked in. The case files were still touched. The violations still happened. Accountability came after, never instead of. That's the reality. Rights don't prevent violations. They just create consequences when violations are proven. And proof requires cameras, documentation, and the resources to fight back. Elijah had all 3. Most people have none. See you in the next one.